The morning mist clung to the towering peaks of the North American wilderness, like ancient spirits reluctant to depart. Leon Whitehorse stood at the edge of his property, weathered hands gripping his walking stick as he surveyed the vast expanse that had belonged to his family for 7 generations. The Whitehorse clan had carved their legacy into these mountains, building their lives around the rhythm of seasons and the ancient contract between man and nature. At 68, Leon carried the wisdom of the mountains in his bones. His copper skin bore the marks of countless seasons spent under the unforgiving sun, and his dark eyes held the depth of someone who had witnessed both the fierce beauty and merciless cruelty of the wilderness. For 40 years, he had tended his flock of sheep, guiding them through the treacherous mountain passes and protecting them from the wolves that prowled the shadows. But this morning felt different. A restless energy pulsed through the air, and Leon couldn't shake the feeling that change was coming. His son Marcus had married young Sarah Blackbird 2 years ago, and now they were expecting their first child, Leon's first grandchild. The thought filled him with a joy so profound it almost frightened him. He had spent his life as a shepherd, a guardian of simple creatures, but soon he would guide a new generation of his own bloodline. The baby was due any day now, and Leon found himself dreaming of teaching his grandchild the old ways. He imagined small hands learning to gentle a frightened lamb, young eyes wide with wonder as he shared the secret places of the mountains, the hidden springs, the ancient cave paintings left by their ancestors, the sacred groves where eagle feathers could be found as gifts from the sky spirits. "Papa, the sheep are getting restless," Marcus called from the barn, his voice carrying the slight edge it had developed since Sarah's pregnancy advanced. The responsibility of impending fatherhood sat heavily on his 25-year-old shoulders. Leon nodded, pushing aside his contemplation. The flock needed guidance to the upper meadows where the early spring grass grew sweet and tender. As they herded the sheep together, father and son worked in the comfortable silence of shared purpose, their border collie Rex darting expertly around the flock's perimeter. For weeks, their routine had been as predictable as the sunrise: wake before dawn, tend the sheep, check the fences, prepare for the wolves that would come with darkness. But on this particular morning, Leon felt the weight of monotony pressing against his chest like a stone. The same meals, the same paths, the same conversations. He craved something different, something that would break the cycle. That's when he remembered the taste of wild hare, a delicacy from his youth that he hadn't enjoyed in over a decade. The memory of its rich, gamey flavor made his mouth water. The decision came suddenly. He would spend the morning hunting at the foot of Thunder Mountain, where the hares were plentiful and the terrain challenging enough to make the expedition feel like an adventure. "Take the flock to Miller's Ridge today," he told Marcus. "I'm going hunting." Marcus raised an eyebrow but nodded. He understood his father's need for occasional solitude in the wilderness. Leon gathered his gear, a well-worn hunting rifle, his grandfather's bone-handled knife, a coil of rope, and a leather pouch containing jerky and dried berries. The trek to Thunder Mountain's base would take him through some of the most beautiful and dangerous terrain in the region, but he knew every stone and stream by heart. The sun climbed higher as Leon made his way through the dense pine forest, his boots finding purchase on paths that existed more in memory than reality. The familiar sounds of the wilderness surrounded him: the whisper of wind through ancient branches, the distant call of a red-tailed hawk, the gentle babble of Whispering Creek that carved its way through the mountainside. It was near the creek that Leon first heard the sound that would change everything, a cry of such raw anguish that it seemed to tear through the morning air like a physical wound. He froze, every instinct honed by decades in the wilderness suddenly alert. The sound came again, weaker this time, filled with a desperation that made his chest tighten. Following the source of the cries, Leon pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel and emerged into a small clearing at the base of a towering cliff. What he saw there took his breath away. A golden eagle, magnificent beyond anything he had ever witnessed, lay crumpled against a boulder. Its wingspan, even folded in pain, was easily 8 feet across. The bird's golden-brown plumage caught the sunlight like burnished metal, and its fierce yellow eyes fixed on Leon with an intelligence that was almost human. But something was terribly wrong. The eagle's left wing hung at an unnatural angle, and dark blood stained the rocks beneath it. Leon approached slowly, speaking in the soft, ancient Lakota words his grandmother had taught him for calming injured animals. The eagle didn't flee, couldn't flee, but watched him with eyes that seemed to weigh his intentions. As he drew closer, Leon could see the full extent of the injury. The wing was badly broken, probably from a collision with the cliff face during a hunting dive. Without hesitation, Leon shed his jacket and carefully wrapped it around the powerful bird. The eagle's grip could crush bone, its beak could tear flesh, but it allowed itself to be handled with a resignation that spoke of complete trust or complete defeat. Leon suspected it was a combination of both. The journey back to his ranch became an epic in itself. The eagle was heavier than he had expected, easily 30 pounds of pure muscle and bone. His arms burned with the effort, and sweat poured down his face as he navigated the treacherous mountain paths. Several times he had to rest, setting the eagle gently on flat rocks while he caught his breath. Each time, those golden eyes watched him, and Leon began to sense something profound in their depths, an ancient wisdom that predated human civilization. By the time he reached home, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the valley. Marcus rushed out to meet him, his eyes widening when he saw the massive bird in his father's arms. "My God, Papa, what happened?" "Broken wing," Leon said simply. "Take the flock to the evening pasture. I have work to do." Leon converted the spare room into a makeshift aviary, removing furniture and covering the floor with old blankets. He worked through the afternoon, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations of his people who had lived alongside the great birds. Using strips of cloth and wooden splints carved from cedar, he carefully set the broken wing. The eagle endured the procedure with stoic patience, only occasionally letting out soft chirps that sounded almost like words of encouragement. Over the following weeks, Leon became the eagle's devoted caretaker. He brought fresh trout from the stream, rabbits he trapped in the lower meadows, and even scraps of venison from his winter stores. Slowly, remarkably, the great bird began to heal. Leon named him Wikapai, star in Lakota, for the way the sunlight caught the golden flecks in his feathers. The relationship that developed between man and eagle transcended anything Leon had experienced. Wikapi seemed to understand that Leon was not his captor, but his savior. As his strength returned, the eagle would perch on the windowsill of his recovery room, gazing out at the mountains with an expression Leon could only describe as longing. After 6 weeks, the day came when Wikapi spread his wings, both wings, in a magnificent display of recovered power. Leon's family gathered in the yard to witness the release. Sarah, now heavily pregnant and due any day, stood beside Marcus with her hand resting on her swollen belly. Even Rex sat at attention, somehow sensing the significance of the moment. Leon opened the makeshift aviary and stepped back. For a long moment, Wikapi simply stood there, golden eyes fixed on his rescuer. Then, with a cry that seemed to shake the very mountains, the eagle launched himself into the sky. He circled the ranch 3 times, each pass lower than the last, before soaring toward the high peaks where he belonged. But Wikapi's departure was not goodbye. It was a promise. Every few days the great eagle would return, sometimes perching on the barn roof, sometimes gliding over the sheep pastures. Leon began to understand that he had gained not just a friend, but a guardian. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning when the aspens had turned to gold, and the first hint of winter touched the high peaks. Tony Whitehorse entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to echo across the valley. Leon held his grandson for the first time with hands that trembled not from age, but from overwhelming love. The child was perfect, dark hair like silk, eyes that would someday hold the wisdom of the mountains, and tiny fingers that gripped Leon's thumb with surprising strength. As if summoned by some mystical connection, Wikapi appeared within hours of Tony's birth, circling the ranch with cries that sounded celebratory. The eagle perched on the fence post nearest the house, head tilted as if listening to the baby's first sounds, before disappearing again into the vast sky. 3 months later, the extended Whitehorse clan gathered for Tony's naming ceremony, a tradition that combined ancient Lakota customs with the family's own evolution over generations in the mountains. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends filled the ranch house with laughter and celebration. The October afternoon was perfect, warm enough for the doors to remain open, cool enough for a fire to crackle cheerfully in the great stone fireplace. Leon stepped outside for a moment of peace, cradling 3-month-old Tony in his arms. The baby was alert, dark eyes studying the world with the focused intensity that would become his trademark. Leon was pointing out the different peaks, beginning the lifelong process of teaching his grandson the geography of home, when Wikahpi's familiar cry split the air. But this cry was different, urgent, almost frantic. Leon looked up to see the great eagle circling frantically, diving and climbing in patterns that made no sense. As Leon watched, confused, Wikahpi suddenly dove straight down, talons extended, heading directly for them. Time seemed to slow as the eagle's powerful talons gripped Tony's tiny shoulders, not to harm, but to lift. Leon's blood turned to ice as he watched his grandson being carried into the sky, Wikahpi's wings beating powerfully as he gained altitude. The old man's cry of anguish brought the entire family pouring out of the house. "The eagle's taken Tony!" Marcus shouted, his voice breaking with panic. The family scattered across the yard, shouting and pointing, as Wikahpi flew in a wide circle around the ranch, Tony's small form visible in his grip. Sarah's screams pierced the air while Marcus ran toward the barn, perhaps thinking to get his rifle. But Leon stood frozen, not by fear, but by a sudden, inexplicable understanding. This was not an attack. This was a rescue. Even as the thought formed in his mind, the earth beneath their feet began to tremble. The first boulder was the size of a pickup truck. It broke away from the cliff face with a sound like thunder, crashing into the spot where Leon had been standing just moments before. More followed. An avalanche of stone and earth that had been building pressure for months, perhaps years, waiting for the right moment to unleash its fury. The ranch house, which had stood for 3 generations of White Horse men, disappeared under tons of granite and limestone. The barn followed, then the storage sheds. In less than 30 seconds, everything Leon's family had built was reduced to splinters and dust. The family huddled together in the open pasture, watching in stunned silence as their world was buried. Only then did Wikahpi return, gliding down with the grace of a feather on wind. He landed gently in the grass 20 feet away and carefully released Tony, who had somehow remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, as if he had understood he was in the care of a guardian. Leon approached the great eagle on unsteady legs, his mind reeling with the magnitude of what had just occurred. Wikahpi stood motionless, golden eyes fixed on the old man who had once saved his life. In that gaze, Leon saw something that transcended the boundaries between species. He saw gratitude, wisdom, and a debt repaid in full. "Thank you," Leon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving us all." Wikahpi spread his magnificent wings one final time, released a cry that seemed to bless the valley, and disappeared into the vast Montana sky. He would return from time to time over the years, a distant silhouette against the clouds, watching over the White Horse family as they rebuilt their lives. Leon never forgot the lesson of that day. That kindness, even to the wildest creature, creates bonds that transcend understanding. And young Tony grew up knowing that somewhere in the high peaks, a guardian watched over him, ready to repay the debt of compassion that had saved them all. The mountains remembered, as they always did, and the story of the eagle's debt became legend, passed down through generations of the White Horse clan as proof that in the wilderness, mercy and wildness are not opposites, but partners in the ancient dance of survival.